Greetings students, I'm Dr. Sadi, your instructor for this IPE course, and what we're going to do today is we're going to continue with what? Module 6. And in Module 6, if you remember, we had two interrelated policy issues. Trade, which we covered during the first part, and now we're going to focus on what? On development. So having said that one, let's get started. Okay, so in terms of the development, we have this outline that covers basically 7 major points. Okay, so we start with an introduction. We go to what are the developing nations, and we talk about LDCs from independence to what? To the Washington Consensus, and then how to develop. That's a very important question. And the East Asian miracles and the Asian financial crisis. Then we talk about the development and globalization, and last but not least we focus on what? Conclusion. Okay, let's get started. So in terms of the development, I must say that is one of those topics that is not just a focus on developing countries, it's a focus on all countries. Of course, the developing countries, they're more interested because they saw themselves very much behind everybody else, is that right? And then, they wanted to develop in every aspect of life. Now, the reason I said every aspect of life is usually when we talk about development, everybody thinks about only economic development, okay? They're thinking about, well, in our country, we don't have very many train station, or we have no train station, no bus station, no really, asphalt, roads, there are still dirt roads and everything else, or no airports, or no this, or no that. You see what I mean? There's infrastructure, which is a very significant part of economic development, beyond, of course, and, beyond discussing actual trade. Because how could trade happen if there is no, infrastructure that would allow for example, commodities you produce or even services you produce to be exported or even imported? You see what I mean? So that's very important in that regard. So first of all, you need to remember that the term development in general is not limited to the economic aspect. So economic development is one aspect, political development is another aspect. In this particular lecture, we're going to focus on the one, economic development, even though economic and political one, they have a connection with one another. Why? Because when we think about, for example, Western development model, which was developed in Western Europe and then has spread around among many of the, Western-oriented countries. Is that right? So what happened? Right after the Dark Ages and Enlightenment came out and Renaissance and everything, and then there was an age of scientific discoveries and scientific way of thinking, as opposed to thinking only about, supernatural things. You see what I mean? Then that led into what? Industrialization process, and industrialization process required also education, particularly public education. So in other words, people started getting educated, they started working, in ways that they would make more money, and they got wealthier. As people become wealthier, if as a labor or as an entrepreneur, what did they ask for little by little? They start asking the leaders of the country for a share of the leadership. They wanted to have some kind of saying in terms of who's going to be leading the country. So economic development led into political development. We see that one all over Western Europe. Is that right? And of course, similar situation has happened in that regard in North Americas and others. So this is what is known as the Western development, model. As you can see, the two are what? Interconnected. But in general, here we talk about economic development. Now be very, very careful, because there are terminologies that are sometimes confused with one another, and some of them are not politically correct. So I'm going to tell you some of them, okay? I don't use it myself, but I'm going to tell you because you need to be careful that you don't use something in a way that you turn off your audience. Okay. Number one is the whole idea of, what they call Westernization. Is that right? So they use the term Westernization because these things are associated with the West in general, somewhere else. Now, think about it. If you are not from the West, if you are from the East, if you're from Asia, Middle East, other parts of the world, the term Westernization suggests not only you have to economically develop, but also you have to change your value system. In other words, you have to become a completely different person. Who would like that? Nobody would like that. How do we Americans like if somebody comes over here and says, yeah, maybe you're materialistically developed, but you should be Easternized, you know? We wouldn't like it, is that right? So please do not use the term Westernization that you see some of the traditional political scientists and IR scholars actually, and even developmentalists used, okay? And sometimes when they use it, they even refer to those countries as underdeveloped or backward countries. Please do not say that, okay? It's not politically correct. Even if you're thinking about it, don't say it. All right. You can actually see in translation of some of the supposedly very progressive people, like Karl Marx. You know, when you're thinking about some of his thoughts about other countries that they were under, he would refer to them as backward countries. Okay, I mean that would be a direct translation from German to English. You see, but nobody talks about that. That's one. The other one you need to consider is. After Westernization, a lot of people start talking about modernization. So you have to be careful because modernization of roads, modernization of the, delivery system, all of that, very well understood. Is that right? But modernization also has, like the other one, a cultural dimension. Because when you say modern, here comes modern ideas and modern way of doing things against the traditional. And in that type of rivalry, always the traditional is considered bad, negative, not good. You see what I mean? So if that's the case, that doesn't mean fine, because there are a lot of traditional values that are fine. Like, for example, our love for our family and being family-oriented. Well, that's a very traditional value, is that right? And then there was some research about it done here and there. People like Banfield, they suggested, for example, the reason Italy is not, the southern part of Italy is not developed so much is because the value system over there is so strong. People are not willing to travel for jobs some other parts of the, country. And the northern part of Italy is more developed because people have that social mobility and they move around. They do not limit themselves to one geographic area just to be close to their family. Can you imagine some, scholar, is that right, of development talking like that nowadays? Somebody talks like that, they said that's politically incorrect. Now, there is a lot of literature about this. When I was in grad school, we have to read that stuff, So what I'm trying to tell you is be very careful even with the term modernization. Is that right? You can always just say economic modernization, is that right? Or something like that. I think the best term to use for this process is just, economic development. Or some people, they even get it just particularly focused on the industrial part of it. They say industrialization. So try not to use ever Westernization, that's number one. And try to avoid also modernization, even though a lot of these things are associated with the theory of modernization because of that dichotomy I was explaining. So having said that one, now let's move on to what? So what are the developing nations? Well, the developing nations are the nations that usually have come from either Asia, Africa, Latin America, is that right? They've had a couple of different experiences. Either they were great powers, used to be great powers like the Persians and the Egyptians and Ottomans who became Turkey and everything, or China or whatever, is that right? And that these countries, they fell behind for whatever reason, is that right? Historical reason. The other part of it was some of them, they were colonies, like many countries in, Africa, they were colonies. Some countries in Asia, they were colonies, or they had a colonial section, like China, for example, all the way, until 1990s, had Hong Kong and Macau, two areas that Portuguese and the British, they, traditionally they used it as a what? As a colony, is that right? And then eventually by the agreement that they had a 99-year lease, was returned to what? Returned to China. But, there were many of the Asian countries. Philippines used to be a colony, is that right? Parts of, Vietnam and other countries that were colonies. Latin America, what should I say, is that right? There were many of them were part of either, Spanish colony or what? Portuguese colony. Central America the same way, and also what? Others. Remember, we Americans, we were a colony ourselves. We were a colony of the British. Is that right? So here we go. And then we passed, when we got our independence, we were developing countries, and we were very lucky. We had such good founding fathers and leaders that what, despite disagreement with each other, they all put us in the right direction. Is that right? Okay, so there are economic challenges, of course, because what many developing countries are missing is what developed countries they have, from infrastructure to other stuff. Now, something else I want you to consider is this. Also, there's a lot of discussion about this thing. Focus on what? On notion of materialistic dimension of it. Oh, money, So you would see some of the indicators for seeing who is developed or not is GNP, GDP, GNP, gross national product, GDP, gross domestic product. Is that right? And then each one of them divided by the capital, we call it GNP per capita. What does it mean? Which means that number has divided by the total population to give us an average, value of how each one of those people is worth. Is that right? And that would tell us, within some tables, oh, they're richer or they're poorer. Is that right? Well, not all of the societies. If you look at, for example, some of the, Middle Eastern countries that they have oil, or some other countries that they have some particular commodities that is very, very popular. Is that right? Okay, yeah. Maybe if you divide that wealth on the population, the number shows up very well, but the quality of life is still not the same way. Well, in the West, for example, the lifespan of men and women goes to late 70s. Is that right? In many of those countries, African, Asian, Latin American, sometimes people, they die in their 40s and 50s and early 60s. You see what I mean? That's a very big difference. Also, not everybody has high education. Another thing you need to consider is other, qualities of life in terms of medical services, this, that, etc. So it came out with also the notion of quality of life challenge. Is that right? That's why United Nations came out with PQLI, Quality of Life Index. Is that right? Because there are countries that are rich on that side, but the quality of life is not as high. Then another notion is the poor infrastructure that I have been mentioning it to you. And that's usually the first thing you see. Is that right? The quality of the roads. Is there any kind of station? Is there a train station? Is there, port? Sophisticated port, not like, oh, the old-fashioned way. Oh, look, a little boat comes over there and people, they move those, bags of, wheat or... No, we're talking about a place that can take container ships. Is that right? With a deep sea, port and everything. Okay, so then there are, of course, political challenges, because you could have all of this, but your population has not benefited from what Western model population has provided to Western, developed countries. Is that right? Like, they don't have the right to vote. They cannot choose their leaders and everything else. So these are some of the things you need to consider. All right. One of the other things, LDCs from independence to Washington. Now, of course, one of the things you should consider is all these, colonial countries, eventually they got their independence. Is that right? Okay. They got their independence, but just having a flag and a national anthem, it doesn't make you completely independent, because you could be politically independent, but economically, you would be still depending on what? Those former colonial powers. Your trade still goes over there. They're still your main customer. And if they decide, I don't want you, or they want to punish you, they don't buy from you, they buy it from somebody else. You see? So those are very, very important. So that's why they have come up to some kind of negotiation with the developed countries under a different one. So neocolonialism and dependency. Now, if you remember when we were talking about the structures, two of the major modern theories associated with structures. One was dependency theory, which was basically developed by a lot of Latin American, experts. Is that right? Because they were among the developing countries that they got their independence first from Spain and Portugal and others. Is that right? They were the first one that were facing that, and they faced that notion. So they came up with that idea. And that is a form of colonialism. Is that right? If you think politically you're independent, but economically you're still dependent. All right? The other thing is the market, unleashed. Is that right? So many of these countries, they started thinking about, okay, how could I become as rich as these guys? Oh, maybe I should promote the market economy. Is that right? Free trade, this, that, etc., etc. Well, it worked for some, and it didn't for others. And we're going to go and talk more about this one later. Is that right? So here we go. So how to develop the economic liberal perspective? It says what? Less government intervention, freedom of trade, etc., etc. Well, you've heard of it all. Is that right? I'm just repeating it. Structures perspective, they say, no, you need to have. So remember, here the unit of analysis in the economic development is individual. Right here, structures development, the unit of analysis is collective. Is that right? Because, that's why they had things like collective farms, collective this, collective that. Is that right? Because they were thinking about that would bring more benefit to the people. Well, And these collectives, as you notice, one of the reasons Soviet Union fell apart was not even able to produce enough consumer products for its people. It was able to produce really good weapons, and in terms of even space, many times they were ahead of us. But that's not something people eat. Is that right? You can't eat your Kalashnikov. You need food. I remember when my dad was working with the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, we were traveling to Soviet Union, and then we would go sometimes to the supermarket. There was like no food, I mean, supermarkets were basically empty. Sometimes you could find one loaf of bread that was so damn hard that my mom had to kind of steam it or something so we could actually buy it and everything. And then we were the guests. So the days that, we were not invited to something, we had to and that was a very interesting, understanding of that period. So that's one of the other. Then mercantilist perspective, either I win or I lose, and I prefer to be the winner, so you would be the loser. Well, that's another perspective. Is that right? Very selfish one, and it can lead into major conflict, as we have seen. Okay, here we go. Then there is also, not all the development, stories are negative and dependencies and bad and this and that. Guess what? There are some also very positive stories. Those positive stories, especially many of them in, East Asia. Many people, they consider East Asia to be, for example, places like Korea, especially after the Korean War, is that right? And Japan after World War II, which was basically level. People, they think about, it was level because we threw 2 atomic bombs over there in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were, both of them were highly industrialized centers of Japan. Guess what? Even in other cities, because most of the buildings were made of wood, we threw these bombs that they would set everything on fire. Many of their other cities was basically level. It wasn't just Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Of course, those two, there were a lot more damages and a lot more innocent people got killed. Is that right? But there was some other stuff. So everybody thought, these are backward countries, and forget about even places like Singapore and Malaysia and others. Guess what? Many of those places, they came back. They promoted trade and this and that, and they focus on what we call export-led growth. ELG, is that right? And then here we go in the 21st century, in the first quarter of 21st century. What do you see? We see a lot of Korean product, which Korea, unfortunately, used to be called the basket case. What basket case? Is that right? Look at Korea right now. Their car manufacturers like Kia, is that right, and Hyundai, they're capturing a significant part of our American market. Look at the electronics that they're producing. Samsung and LG, in terms of appliances, TV, electronics, they capture. Look at, of course, before Korea, it was actually Japan. Is that right? Japanese, quality cars, Hondas and Toyotas. Here we go. Is that right? Or Sony and Mitsubishi and other brands. So these are considered to be the Asian miracles. And then not just Japan. In fact, with Korea comes out examples like Singapore. Is that right? And Taiwan, okay? So sometimes Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan have been considered to be they call it baby tigers, okay? So don't be ready for that, or financial miracles. But also, sometimes in some part of Asia, there has been some problems. Like what? Like, for example, when the Chinese build, Japanese build, is that right? And then you build, but you're hoping that the building is going to be full of what? Some businesses, all right? The building is empty, you're going to have a real estate problem, and that real estate problem is going to go throughout your whole economy. So there has been some financial crisis or something, but they have been managing it. Is that right? So the lesson that we can learn from, actually, for example, what the Latin Americans have done. Latin American countries developing, they follow the policy called ISI. Import substitution industrialization. Is that right? For example, we see that Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, they did that. And what is the philosophy of it? The philosophy of it is you look at what you're importing, you see if you can manage to do it yourself. Like, for example, they were importing toothbrushes and toothpaste. Oh my goodness gracious. This is not like an electronic miracle. Is that right? So you go to, for example, Procter & Gamble, is that right? Or Colgate Company, and you say, look, I would like to produce your toothbrush and toothpaste in my own country. They say, well, you need to have license. Okay, you pay for that license. Could you please come here to our country? We provide you with some incentive and establish a factory, and then we would produce it under your name. But our people would be working, and then we would producing. They say, sure, why not? Is that right? So in all of these countries, many of these products, they started being developed. So as a part of what? Import substitution, industrialization. Is that right? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so import substitution, industrialization. Wow. So this was something that they were importing, and now what do? They are building it at home, and they are building it at home. So which means they're not importing it anymore, and they have a factory. They've led into an industrialization, and their labor is working on it, and they're making money out of it. What is better than that? Well, guess what? There was a limit to that one because you can't do everything like that. That's why, as I mentioned, many of the Eastern East Asian countries, they went for export-led growth. So there are some advantages to ISI, there are some disadvantages. There are some advantages to ELG, and then there are some disadvantages. Now, how do we conclude our discussion? You need to consider that globalization is one issue, but some people, they say globalization has led into some benefit for trade and some disadvantages at the same time. For trade. Okay, so what is this one? You need to consider that this is like a top-down approach to development. Is that right? So you're looking at what is good for the whole, planet Earth, and the whole economic system would be good for that. Well, for some countries it's been good. For other countries that they couldn't, compete, and they couldn't find a niche for themselves, hasn't been so good. You see, they have been on the losing side. So then there is also the bottom-up approach to the development, that, okay, we need to see what do we have that we can offer and develop that one. Some countries have done that. Look at, for example, Singapore. Is that right? Singapore, like tiny little island off the what? Malaysia, is that right? Doesn't even have its own water. The water has to come through pipes under the sea, from Malaysia to Singapore. But look at what they have done in terms of their industries, in terms of their services, some of the best universities, highest quality of life, is that right? So when you have good leaders, okay, and then people are willing to work, you can do miracles, even when you don't have any natural resources. So that one was a very interesting case for us. Also, bottom-up approach to empowering women. Look, in every society, I've mentioned this one when we were talking about alternative theories and everything and feminism. In every society, naturally, according to biological factors, I don't know, I'm not a biologist, but I know that one from my biology, colleagues. They say that naturally every society produces more female than male. Well, guess what? Traditionally, a lot of females were producing services that, because they get married, they bear children, is that right? And then they feed the children, they clean the home, they do this, they do that, they cook. But guess what? All of these services nowadays are what? They can be provided from outside the home. Daycare, is that right? Taking care of the kids, you want to eat food, but you don't make it at home. All these food services and everything, all the DoorDash, this, that, they deliver for you, or all those, blue ribbon and white ribbon and this ribbon and that ribbon, and they send you packaged food. All you have to do is just stick it in the microwave or oven or whatever, is that right? Well, guess what? Those are industries built based on those services that women used to produce for their families for free. Okay? So, we need to consider those things. Many of those figures traditionally didn't used to go to the GNP per capita, GDP per capita. You see what I mean? So then, if their women were working outside the home, usually it was traditional work, like what? Nurses, school teachers. The good thing about it is because so many women are getting high education, they're actually entering to other, professions. Many of them are doctors, university professors, astronauts, and so on. There is no limit. Is that right? And of course, politicians as well. And I think from my perspective as a professor of political science, it's very advantageous because women, they have one perspective, men have another perspective. Our society is not made of all women or made of all men. So all together, when they put their thoughts together, maybe they can come up with better quality policies, which more people can benefit from it. Is that right? So we shouldn't underestimate that. We should empower our women. Next one. Development goals and foreign aid in the new millennium. Well, guess what? The United Nations came up with the whole idea that you know what we need to do? We need to really come up with some kind of development goals. And that has been an issue that they have been dealing with. And, you know, I thought your texts and the books, they really talk about this one very well in like a historical perspective, like a story. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by going to details. The burden of long-term debt, that has been an issue for many developing countries. Guess what? Some developed countries have it too, you know, because they borrow sometimes to pay off for products that they desperately need. Let's say they have a crisis, there was a drought or something, they didn't produce enough food or something, so they have to import food, so they borrow. Is that right? Or they are having a major development project like dams or railroad or whatever. You see what I mean? They borrow and then they don't have enough and they fall into a debt, and that is something that they had to handle. China's influence on development. China has produced a very different model of development. Is that right? Well, Western model, do you remember? Economic development leading to political development. China has focused very much on economic development, almost nothing on political development. Is that right? Right now we see President Xi has been president for so long, he kept changing the constitution. Seems like he's going to be the next, you know, I don't know, a Chinese, you know, emperor. Is that right? Because the other ones, they basically all came and left. Is that right? After a period of time. And he's changing the image of China as well. So economic development without political one. How do we conclude? We conclude by remind you that in this particular topic, we focus mostly on the odd economic one, even though from time to time I mention some stuff about the political development, which are connected, okay? The two topics are connected. But you're getting this basically the appetizer version, is that right? So you can digest the readings and everything else. So economic development is necessary for all countries in the world. Of course, developing countries and developed countries, because developed countries, they still need to what? Raise their level of development, okay? Look, there was a time that we were focusing on manufacturing, all right? You know, before that, we were focusing on agriculture. So everybody was an agrarian society. Well, that didn't get us everywhere, is that right? Then industrialization, so manufacturing. Nowadays, a lot of services. And nowadays, you know, I mean, particularly recently, with us AI coming out and shaking the society, is that right? You know, when Henry Ford, for example, created this whole notion of what? Basically assembly line, he revolutionized industrialization and manufacturing and everything. And now we are in a period that computers and programs and everything else that human being has created has come up with this AI, and the future is unknown. Is that right? Is this going to be good? It's not going to be good. This is something that your generation is going to be dealing with it more than my generation, as we are going to be retired and just enjoy a little bit of free time of our own before we die, okay? But you're going to be dealing with it, and I want to make sure that you're familiar with what these notions, so you can come up with much better solution than what our generation. Having said that one, as usual, if you have any kind of questions, what do? You email me. Thank you.